The rattling stagecoach jolted to a stop in front of Copper Creek's dust-covered Main Street, and Dorothea Edwards clutched her small leather valise with trembling fingers, wondering if she had made the greatest mistake of her 22 years of life. Through the smudged window, she glimpsed the weathered buildings of what would now be her home, a far cry from the Boston society she had left behind, all for the promise of security in the arms of a wealthy cattle baron she had never met. The year was 1875, and like many women facing dwindling prospects in the East, Dorothea had answered an advertisement seeking a bride for one of the most prosperous men in the Wyoming Territory. Augustus Blackwell had promised her a life of comfort, fine dresses, and social standing, everything her family's financial collapse had stripped from her. His letters had been formal, businesslike, but filled with promises of a grand house and servants to attend her every need. In her desperation, she had accepted, trading the last of her inheritance for a one-way ticket west. Copper Creek. "End of the line for this route, folks," the driver called, opening the door to the relentless heat of the late June afternoon. Dorothea stepped down gingerly, her traveling dress the finest she still owned immediately gathering a layer of dust at its hem. She squinted in the harsh sunlight, expecting to see Mr. Blackwell waiting to claim his bride. Instead, the handful of people milling about the station paid her little mind, and no well-dressed gentleman approached. Miss Edwards. A boy of perhaps 12 appeared at her elbow. "I'm Tommy. Mr. Blackwell sent me to fetch you. He's tied up with business at the ranch today, but says to tell you welcome to Copper Creek." Disappointment flashed through her, not even important enough for her future husband to greet in person. She nodded stiffly. "I see. And how are we to reach the ranch?" "Got a wagon just over yonder." The boy pointed to a weathered farm wagon with a single horse in harness. "It ain't fancy, but it'll get us there before dark if we hurry." As Tommy loaded her trunk onto the back, Dorothea surveyed the town. A saloon, a general store, a small bank, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office lined the single Main Street. Men in dusty clothes moved about their business, and a few women in practical frontier dresses carried parcels or hurried children along. Nothing like the opulent town she had imagined from Augustus Blackwell's letters. She was about to climb awkwardly onto the wagon when a commotion erupted from the saloon. A man stumbled out through the swinging doors, followed by the angry shouts of someone inside. He regained his footing with surprising grace despite his obvious state of inebriation, and dusted off his worn denim pants. "You can keep your crooked game, Patterson," the man called back into the establishment, "but we both know who the better horseman is." Even in his disheveled state, there was something compelling about him. Tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat that needed a proper cutting. His shirt was faded blue, patched at the elbow, and his boots had seen better years, but he carried himself with an easy confidence that caught Dorothea's eye. "That's just Nick Hawkins," Tommy explained, noticing her stare. "Best horse trainer in the territory, but can't keep 2 cents to his name on account of his gambling." "I see," Dorothea said, quickly averting her gaze as the man Nick turned in their direction. She had not come all this way to be distracted by some penniless drifter, no matter how striking his profile. "Well, well," Nick said, approaching with a lazy stride. "New arrival in our humble town." Despite the whiskey on his breath, his blue eyes were sharp and assessed her with undisguised interest. "This here's Mr. Blackwell's mail-order bride," Tommy announced with the tactlessness of youth. "I'm taking her out to the Double B now." Something flickered in Nick's expression, surprise, perhaps even disapproval, but it vanished behind a crooked smile. "Augustus Blackwell's bride, huh? Well, welcome to Copper Creek, Miss Edwards." "Dorothea Edwards," she replied stiffly, extending her gloved hand as propriety demanded, though she wished the boy hadn't been so forthcoming with her circumstances. Nick removed his battered hat and took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he brushed his lips across her knuckles in a gesture more suited to an Eastern gentleman than a dusty cowboy. "Pleasure to make your acquaintance, Miss Edwards. Nick Hawkins, at your service." The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm, and she withdrew her hand quickly. "Mr. Hawkins, Blackwell's a lucky man," Nick said, his eyes lingering on her face longer than was proper. "Though I'm surprised he didn't come to greet you himself. Mr. Blackwell is a busy man with important affairs," Dorothea said defensively, though the same thought had troubled her. Nick's smile turned knowing. "Oh, Augustus Blackwell is very concerned with affairs, that's for certain." Before she could decipher his meaning, Tommy interrupted. "We best get going, Miss Edwards. It's a fair piece to the ranch, and Mr. Blackwell doesn't like to be kept waiting." "Of course." Dorothea moved toward the wagon, and Nick stepped forward. "Allow me," he said, placing strong hands at her waist and lifting her effortlessly onto the wagon seat. The casual contact was shocking. No man in Boston would have dared such familiarity with a lady, but she found herself more flustered than offended. "Thank you," she managed, arranging her skirts primly. Nick stepped back, replacing his hat. "Word of advice, Miss Edwards," he said, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Things out west ain't always what they seem in fancy letters. Keep your eyes open." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and sauntered back toward the saloon, leaving her puzzled and slightly unsettled. "Don't mind him," Tommy said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "Nick's got no love for Mr. Blackwell on account of some business between them last year. Some say Mr. Blackwell cheated him out of a prized stallion, but others say Nick lost it fair and square in a card game." As the wagon lurched forward, Dorothea cast one last glance toward the saloon, catching Nick Hawkins watching her departure with an unreadable expression. She turned resolutely forward. She had not traveled 2,000 miles to be distracted by a handsome face and cryptic warnings. Augustus Blackwell represented security and status, everything she had lost when her father's investments failed and left her an orphan with mounting debts. The road out of town gave way to open country, sagebrush, and rolling hills stretching toward distant mountains. Despite her exhaustion, Dorothea found herself captivated by the wild beauty of the landscape, so different from the manicured gardens and crowded streets of Boston. "Is it much farther?" she asked after they had traveled for nearly an hour. "Another hour or so," Tommy replied. Double Beaticus, the biggest spread in the county. Mr. Blackwell owns near 20,000 acres and 5,000 head of cattle. The numbers should have impressed her, but Dorothea found herself thinking instead of Nick Hawkins' warning. What had he meant about things not being what they seemed? The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a hill and Tommy pointed ahead. "There it is, Double B Ranch." In the valley below stood a large house, not the mansion Augustus had described in his letters, but certainly substantial by frontier standards. A 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch, flanked by several outbuildings and corrals. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and cowboys moved about the grounds, tending to end-of-day chores. As they approached, a portly man in an expensive suit emerged onto the porch. Augustus Blackwell was older than Dorothea had expected, at least 50, with graying hair and ruddy jowls. His photograph, sent months ago, must have been taken many years earlier. "Ah, my bride arrives at last," he boomed as the wagon pulled up. His eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl, but she forced a smile. This was her choice, her path to security. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, extending her hand as he approached. I'm pleased to finally meet you. Augustus, my dear, we are to be married after all." He took her hand and pulled her down from the wagon with less grace than Nick had shown, his fingers digging into her waist. "Let me look at you." He made no attempt to hide his assessment of her figure, nodding in approval. "Yes, you'll do nicely. Come inside, you must be exhausted. Tommy, bring Miss Edwards' things to the blue room." The interior of the house was well appointed, if lacking the refinement Dorothea was accustomed to. Heavy furniture, garish paintings, and animal heads adorned the walls, the home of a man with money but questionable taste. "We'll have the wedding on Saturday," Augustus announced as he poured himself a generous whiskey. "Judge Wilson comes through town then. No sense waiting, eh? I've been without a wife for 3 years now, and a man has needs." His bluntness shocked her, but she maintained her composure. "So soon?" "I thought perhaps we might take some time to become acquainted." Augustus laughed. "Acquainted? My dear, that's what marriage is for. Besides, I've paid good money to bring you here. The sooner you're installed as Mrs. Blackwell, the better." The coldness of his statement chilled her. "Paid good money? Like purchasing livestock. I see. Now, let me show you to your room. You can rest before dinner. I've invited some neighbors to meet you, important for you to make the right impression from the start." As Augustus led her upstairs, Dorothea fought a growing sense of unease. This was not the gentleman of his letters, but a coarse man who viewed her as a possession. Still, what choice did she have? Her funds were depleted, and she knew no one in this wild territory. The blue room was pleasant enough, clean, with a comfortable bed and a window overlooking the ranch. "You'll stay here until the wedding," Augustus said. "I've arranged for the widow Jenkins to help you prepare. She'll arrive tomorrow." "Thank you," Dorothea said, grateful at least for this concession to propriety. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." With that, he left her alone. Dorothea sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she had held back all day. What had she done? Traded one uncertain future for another, perhaps worse one. Augustus Blackwell might have wealth, but she already sensed the kind of husband he would be: controlling, demanding, seeing her as little more than property. She moved to the window, gazing out at the vast landscape. Somewhere back in town was Nick Hawkins with his knowing eyes and cryptic warning. Things out west ain't always what they seem in fancy letters. How right he had been. But she was Dorothea Edwards, daughter of a businessman who had taught her to honor her commitments. She had agreed to this marriage, and now she would see it through. With renewed determination, she unpacked her finest dress for dinner, preparing to meet her future as Mrs. Augustus Blackwell. The dinner party proved to be a trial of Dorothea's patience and social skills. Augustus had invited the most prominent families in the area, the banker and his wife, the owner of the largest general store, and 2 neighboring ranchers with their families. 12 people in all, seated around a long table in the dining room, watching her with curious eyes. "Miss Edwards comes to us from Boston," Augustus announced, clearly proud to have secured an Eastern bride. "A lady of refinement who will bring much-needed civilization to our humble community." "Boston?" Mrs. Parker, the banker's wife, raised an eyebrow. "How do you find our little corner of Wyoming after such a grand city?" "It has its own beauty," Dorothea replied diplomatically. "The landscape is quite breathtaking." "And what of your family, Miss Edwards?" asked Mr. Simmons, one of the ranchers. "Do they approve of your arrangement with Blackwell here?" A hush fell over the table, and Dorothea felt Augustus stiffen beside her. The question bordered on impropriety, acknowledging the transactional nature of their engagement. "My parents are deceased," she said simply. "I have no immediate family." "A fortunate circumstance for Blackwell, wouldn't you say?" Simmons persisted with a knowing smile. No father or brothers to question his intentions. Augustus slammed his hand on the table. Now see here, Simmons. It was my decision to accept Mr. Blackwell's proposal, Dorothea interrupted smoothly. And I would appreciate it if my choices were respected. Her calm assertion seemed to impress the women at the table, though Simmons merely chuckled into his wine glass. As the evening progressed, Dorothea learned more about her future husband through the conversation around her than she had from his letters. Augustus Blackwell had come west 15 years earlier with nothing, built his ranch through shrewd, some implied ruthless business dealings, and was now one of the most powerful men in the county. His first wife had died in childbirth along with their infant son, and his second marriage had ended when his wife had fled back east after less than a year. This last piece of information, whispered to her by Mrs. Parker while the men smoked cigars on the porch, gave Dorothy a particular pause. "Don't look so alarmed, dear," Mrs. Parker said, patting her hand. "Millicent Blackwell was a flighty thing not suited to ranch life at all. I'm sure you're made of sterner stuff." "Of course," Dorothea murmured, though the knot in her stomach tightened. When the guests finally departed, Augustus cornered her in the parlor, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You did well tonight. A proper lady just as advertised." "Thank you," she said, trying to edge toward the stairs. "If you'll excuse me, the journey has been exhausting." His hand shot out, grasping her wrist. "Not yet. I've waited months for you to arrive, Dorothea. Surely you can spare your future husband a few moments of affection." Before she could protest, he pulled her against him, his mouth descending on hers in a wet, whiskey-soaked kiss. His hands roamed possessively over her back and down to her hips, holding her firmly when she tried to pull away. "Mr. Blackwell, Augustus, please," she gasped when he finally released her mouth. "This isn't proper before our wedding," he laughed, a harsh sound. "Proper, my dear, you're a mail-order bride. I hardly think the usual proprieties apply." The casual cruelty of his words stung, but Dorothea kept her voice steady. "Nevertheless, I would prefer to wait until we are properly wed. As you said, it's only a few days." For a moment she thought he might force the issue, but then he released her with obvious reluctance. "Very well. But on Saturday night, you'll be my wife in every sense of the word." "Of course," she said, retreating toward the stairs. "Good night, Augustus." Once safely in her room, Dorothea leaned against the door, heart pounding. The encounter had confirmed her worst fears about the man she was to marry. Cold, possessive, viewing her as a purchased commodity rather than a partner. But what alternatives did she have? No money, no connections, in a wild territory where women without protection were vulnerable. Sleep eluded her as she weighed her options. She could go through with the wedding, securing a position as Mrs. Blackwell with all the comfort and status that entailed, enduring whatever unpleasantness came with it. Or she could leave, but to go where? Do what? Dawn found her still at the window, watching as the ranch came to life. Cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse, horses were led from the stables, and the day's work began. Among the men moving about the yard, one figure caught her attention, tall and lean, with that familiar confident stride. Nick Hawkins. Her heart gave an unexpected leap as she watched him lead a magnificent black stallion from the stables. What was he doing here, at Augustus Blackwell's ranch? Dorothea dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The housekeeper, Mrs. Griffith, informed her that Augustus had ridden out early to check on a herd in the north pasture and wouldn't return until evening. "Is there someone training horses here today?" Dorothea asked casually. "That'd be Nick Hawkins," Mrs. Griffith replied, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Best horse trainer in 3 counties, though Mr. Blackwell only uses him when he has to." Bad blood between them, but Mr. Blackwell just acquired a new stallion that needs breaking, and there's none better than Hawkins for the job. After breakfast, Dorothea found herself drawn outside, ostensibly to explore the grounds but really to find the man who had occupied her thoughts since yesterday. She followed the sounds of activity to a corral behind the stables, where a small crowd of ranch hands had gathered to watch. In the center of the corral, Nick Hawkins worked with the black stallion she had seen earlier. Man and horse moved in a kind of dance, the animal initially resistant but gradually responding to Nick's quiet commands and gentle but firm guidance. His skill was evident where the cowboys might have used force or intimidation. Nick used patience and understanding. Dorothea stood at the fence, mesmerized by the display. She had ridden in Boston's parks, but those docile mounts bore little resemblance to this powerful creature gradually yielding to Nick's expertise. "He's got away with the unbreakable ones," said a voice beside her. An older cowboy had joined her at the fence. "That stallion threw 3 men before Mr. Blackwell sent for Hawkins. He seems to understand them," Dorothea observed. "Understands most creatures better than he does people," the cowboy chuckled. "Except maybe the ladies. He does all right there, too." Dorothea felt her cheeks warm at the implication but kept her eyes on the corral. Nick had mounted the stallion now, moving it in careful circles, building trust. The horse responded beautifully, its initial wildness channeled into controlled power. As if sensing her gaze, Nick looked up and spotted her at the fence. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by that same crooked smile he'd given her in town. He guided the horse toward her, stopping a few feet from the fence. "Miss Edwards," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect to see you out here." Up close, in the clear morning light, she could fully appreciate the striking blue of his eyes against his sun-darkened skin. "Mr. Hawkins, I'm surprised to see you as well. I understood there was some discord between you and Mr. Blackwell." Nick's smile turned wry. "Business is business, Miss Edwards. Blackwell may not like me, but he knows I'm the best with horses. Even he can set aside a grudge when it comes to protecting his investments." The stallion pranced restlessly, and Nick soothed it with a gentle hand on its neck. "This fellow's worth a small fortune. Blackwell wouldn't trust just anyone with him." "He's magnificent," Dorothea said, admiring the horse's gleaming coat and proud bearing. "Want to meet him?" Nick asked, dismounting in one fluid motion. Dorothea hesitated. "I'm not sure that's wise." "He seems rather spirited. He's learning trust," Nick said, leading the stallion to the fence. "Slow and steady, hold out your hand palm flat." Nervously, she extended her hand. The stallion snorted, eyeing her suspiciously. "That's it," Nick encouraged. "Let him come to you." After a moment's consideration, the horse stretched its neck and sniffed her palm, then allowed her to stroke its velvety nose. The simple connection with the powerful animal thrilled her. "You've got a good touch," Nick observed. "Most Eastern ladies would be squealing and jumping back." "I've always loved horses," she admitted, "though I've never encountered one quite like this." "Midnight here is special," Nick agreed. "Wild-spirited but intelligent, reminds me of someone I just met." His eyes held hers meaningfully. Dorothea looked away, flustered by his boldness. "Mr. Hawkins, I should remind you that I am engaged to be married." "To a man you met yesterday," Nick pointed out. "A man who sends a boy to collect his bride and doesn't even have the decency to come greet you himself." "You know nothing about my arrangement with Mr. Blackwell," she said stiffly. "I know Augustus Blackwell," Nick countered. "I know he views people the same way he views that stallion, as property to be acquired and controlled. Things of value, not equals." His bluntness shocked her. "That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Ask anyone who's dealt with him, anyone, except those dinner guests he parades around to impress newcomers. Dorothea glanced around nervously, but the other ranch hands had drifted away, leaving them relatively private. "Why are you telling me this?" Nick's expression softened. "Because you deserve to know what you're walking into, Miss Edwards. Blackwell's not just seeking a wife, he's seeking a trophy, an ornament to display his success." "And what business is that of yours?" she challenged, though his words echoed her own misgivings. "None," he admitted with a disarming honesty. "Except I've got this troublesome habit of speaking up when I see someone about to make a mistake they might not be able to undo." Before she could respond, the ranch foreman called out, "Hawkins, that stallion's needed back in the stable." Nick nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Dorothea. "I'll be here through Saturday, working with midnight. If you want to know more about the man you're planning to marry, I'm happy to tell you what I know." "That won't be necessary," she said primly, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Nick smiled as if he could read her thoughts. "The offer stands." He tipped his hat and led the stallion away, leaving Dorothea conflicted and troubled. She spent the remainder of the day exploring the ranch, meeting the staff, and trying to imagine herself as mistress of this domain. The widow Jenkins arrived as promised, a kindly woman who would serve as her companion until the wedding. She brought Dorothea's wedding dress, apparently ordered by Augustus months earlier, a frothy creation of satin and lace that was far more elaborate than Dorothea would have chosen. Mr. Blackwell was most specific about the design, Mrs. Jenkins explained as Dorothea tried it on. He wanted something worthy of displaying his bride. Displaying. The same word Nick had used. A trophy, an ornament. That evening, Augustus returned in high spirits, bearing a gift, a diamond necklace that must have cost a small fortune. "For you to wear at the wedding," he said, fastening it around her throat, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I want everyone to see that Augustus Blackwell's wife has the finest of everything." The diamonds felt cold and heavy against her skin. "It's very beautiful," she said, forcing a smile. Though perhaps a bit ostentatious for a simple ranch wedding, his expression darkened. "There will be nothing simple about our wedding, Dorothea. I've invited 50 guests, the finest families in 3 counties. You'll wear the diamonds and you'll wear them proudly." "Of course," she acquiesced, recognizing the steel beneath his seemingly generous gesture. "I only meant, I know what's best," he cut her off. "You'll learn that soon enough." His tone softened marginally. "Now tell me how you spent your day. I hope you found everything to your satisfaction." She described her exploration of the house and grounds, carefully omitting her encounter with Nick Hawkins. Augustus seemed pleased by her interest in the ranch operations, though he made it clear her role would be confined to the house and social obligations. "A woman's place is managing the household, not concerning herself with cattle and horses," he said dismissively. "I have men for that." "Of course," she said again, that phrase becoming her shield against his pronouncements. "Though I would like to learn to ride properly." "The countryside is so beautiful." Augustus frowned. "Riding alone isn't appropriate for a lady of your standing. Perhaps occasionally, with me as escort, we might take a sedate ride around the property." His controlling nature became more apparent with each conversation, and Dorothea found herself retreating into polite agreement while inwardly resisting his dictates. This was not the partnership she had hoped for, even in her most practical moments of accepting this arrangement. The next morning, Dorothea rose early, before Augustus was awake. She dressed in her simplest skirt and blouse and slipped out to the stables, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Perhaps it was the need for a few moments of freedom before submitting to a lifetime of Augustus Blackwell's rules. Or perhaps it was the hope of encountering Nick Hawkins again, with his straight talk and challenging questions. She found him in the corral as before, this time working with a chestnut mare. He spotted her immediately, a smile breaking across his features that made her heart beat faster. "Miss Edwards," he called. "Come to see Midnight again." "I thought perhaps I might learn something about horses," she replied, approaching the fence. "Since I'm to be a rancher's wife." Nick's eyes twinkled. "Blackwell doesn't strike me as the type to encourage his wife's interest in ranch operations." "Mr. Blackwell has certain ideas about a woman's proper sphere," she admitted, "but what he doesn't know won't concern him." Nick laughed, a warm, genuine sound that drew answering smiles from the few cowboys nearby. Well, the proper Boston lady has a rebellious streak. "Simply a desire to understand my new home," she corrected, though she couldn't help smiling back. "In that case, would you like to meet Rosie here?" He gestured to the chestnut mare. "She's gentler than Midnight might make a fine riding horse for a lady." Dorothea glanced back at the house nervously. "I shouldn't stay long. Mrs. Jenkins will be looking for me." "Just a few minutes," Nick promised, opening the corral gate. She hesitated only briefly before stepping inside, aware she was crossing more than just a physical boundary. Nick led the mare to her, showing her how to approach and stroke the horse's neck, explaining the basics of equine behavior in a way that made perfect sense. "Horses are honest creatures," he told her. "They respond to how you treat them. Respect and kindness earn their trust. Fear and dominance might get compliance, but never loyalty. A philosophy that applies beyond horses, I imagine," Dorothea observed. Nick's eyes met hers. "Most things worth knowing have wide application, Miss Edwards." For the next half hour he taught her the basics of handling a horse, how to lead it, how to read its moods, how to earn its confidence. Dorothea was a quick study, and soon Rosie was following her around the corral like an oversized dog. "You're a natural," Nick said approvingly. "Would you like to try riding her?" "Oh, I couldn't," Dorothea began, then caught herself. Why couldn't she? Because Augustus wouldn't approve, because it wasn't proper. She straightened her shoulders. "Yes, I would like that very much." Nick's smile widened. "That's the spirit." He helped her mount, his hands respectful but strong at her waist, then showed her how to hold the reins and sit properly. "Now just walk her in a circle," he instructed, stepping back. "Gentle pressure with your knees, that's it." Dorothea felt a surge of exhilaration as the mare responded to her commands, walking sedately around the corral. She had ridden before, but always on a lead or with a riding master hovering anxiously. This feeling of connection and control was entirely new. "I'm doing it." She laughed, unable to contain her delight. "You surely are," Nick agreed, his expression warm with admiration. The sound of slow clapping interrupted their lesson. Augustus Blackwell stood at the fence, his face a mask of cold fury. "How touching. My fiancé and the horse trainer having a cozy morning lesson." Dorothea felt her stomach drop. "Augustus, I didn't expect you up so early." "Evidently not." His eyes were hard as flint. "Get down from that horse and come here immediately." Nick moved to help her dismount, but Augustus barked, "Don't touch her, Hawkins. She's mine." The possessive claim made Dorothea flinch. She dismounted awkwardly but on her own, facing Augustus with as much dignity as she could muster. "I was simply learning about the horses. As your wife, I thought I should understand all aspects of the ranch." "My wife will concern herself with appropriate activities," Augustus said coldly. "Cavorting with ranch hands is not among them." "We weren't cavorting, Mr. Blackwell," Nick said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I was teaching Miss Edwards to ride. Your services were engaged for the stallion only, Hawkins. You've overstepped again." Augustus turned to Dorothea. "Go to the house, now." Don't speak to her like she's a child, Nick said, stepping forward, or a servant. Augustus's face darkened. She is my fiancée, and I'll speak to her however I please. As for you, Hawkins, you're done here. Collect your pay and get off my property. Augustus, please, Dorothea interceded. Mr. Hawkins was only being helpful. I asked him to teach me. And that makes it worse, Augustus snapped. A lady does not seek out the company of men like him. Men like me. Nick's voice was soft but carried an edge. You mean men who treat women as equals instead of possessions. Men who earn their living honestly instead of cheating and manipulating. Augustus's hand moved to his belt, where Dorothea noticed for the first time he wore a pistol. You're on dangerous ground, Hawkins. Several cowboys had drifted closer, sensing trouble. Nick glanced at them, then back at Augustus, and visibly reined in his anger. I'll go. But not because you're right, because I don't want trouble for Miss Edwards. He turned to Dorothea, his expression softening. Remember what I said about horses, Miss Edwards. They respond to how they're treated. So do people. With that, he strode toward the stables, leaving Dorothea alone with Augustus's wrath. Inside, Augustus ordered again, gripping her elbow painfully as he steered her toward the house. In the study, he closed the door with ominous restraint. Would you care to explain what you were thinking? I was thinking I should learn about ranch life, Dorothea said, fighting to keep her voice steady. There was no impropriety. Impropriety? Augustus laughed harshly. You were alone with a man, a known gambler and troublemaker engaged in physical activity, dressed like a farmhand's daughter. What would your Boston society friends call that? I would call it a riding lesson, she countered. And I am no longer in Boston society, as you well know. No, you're in my world now, he said, advancing on her. And in my world, a woman's reputation is her most valuable asset. Do you think I want a wife who's the subject of ranch gossip? Nothing happened to gossip about, Dorothea insisted. It doesn't matter what happened. It matters what people think happened. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I've built everything I have from nothing, Dorothea. Do you understand? Everything. My reputation, my standing, it's all I have. And I won't have it tarnished by a wife who can't behave with proper decorum. The real issue became clear, not concern for her reputation, but for his own. Dorothea squared her shoulders. I apologize if my actions reflected poorly on you. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't. He stepped closer, his anger morphing into something more possessive as he traced her cheek with his finger. You're to be my wife, Dorothea. Mine. I don't share what's mine. She forced herself not to flinch from his touch. I understand. Good. He stepped back, his manner becoming businesslike again. The dressmaker is coming this afternoon for your final fitting. Mrs. Jenkins will help you prepare. I expect you to be the perfect bride on Saturday, understand? No more. Incidents? Yes, Augustus. After he left, Dorothea sank into a chair, trembling with reaction. The encounter had revealed Augustus Blackwell's true nature more clearly than any warning could have. The control, the possessiveness, the quick anger, all wrapped in a veneer of concern for propriety. Was this truly the man she would pledge herself to in 2 days' time? And then there was Nick Hawkins, now banished from the ranch because of her. A man who spoke to her as an equal, who encouraged rather than restricted, who saw her as a person rather than a possession. A man who had nothing to offer but his honest labor and that infectious smile. She pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by the choice before her. Security and status with a controlling husband, or what? The alternative wasn't even clear. She had no money, no connections, nowhere to go. The rest of the day passed in a blur of wedding preparations. The dressmaker made final adjustments to her gown. Mrs. Jenkins discussed the ceremony details, and a stream of deliveries arrived for Saturday's celebration. Augustus remained coolly polite, his earlier anger submerged but not forgotten. That night, alone in her room, Dorothea sat at the window watching the stars over the Wyoming landscape. Somewhere out there was Nick Hawkins, perhaps in town at the saloon, perhaps on the trail to another job. She found herself wondering what his life was like, free, unencumbered, answering to no one but himself. Such freedom was not an option for a woman alone, especially one with no resources. Yet the thought of binding herself to Augustus Blackwell for a lifetime suddenly seemed unbearable. "There must be another way," she whispered to the night sky, but no answer came. Friday dawned bright and clear, the day before her wedding. The ranch was a flurry of activity as preparations accelerated. Dorothea moved through it like a ghost, going through the motions, responding appropriately when spoken to, but feeling increasingly detached from the proceedings. Augustus was occupied with business matters, for which she was grateful. In the afternoon, a commotion in the yard drew her to the window. A wagon had arrived carrying Mrs. Parker and several other ladies from town. "A small gathering in your honor," Mrs. Jenkins explained. "A chance for the ladies to welcome you properly before tomorrow's festivities." Dorothea forced a smile and went down to greet them. The women had brought gifts, embroidered linens, preserves, handcrafted items for her new home. Their kindness was genuine, and Dorothea found herself warming to them despite her inner turmoil. As they sat in the parlor with tea and cake, the conversation turned inevitably to marriage and Augustus Blackwell. "You're fortunate to have caught Augustus's eye," Mrs. Parker said. "Many local girls have tried and failed. He's quite particular." "Yes, he seems to know exactly what he wants," Dorothea agreed diplomatically. "And is determined to have it," added Mrs. Simmons, the rancher's wife, with a meaningful look. Mrs. Jenkins cleared her throat nervously. More tea, ladies, but Mrs. Simmons wasn't deterred. "I hope you'll forgive my frankness, Miss Edwards, but as someone who's lived out here for 20 years, I feel I should speak plainly. Augustus Blackwell is a powerful man in these parts. That can be a blessing or a curse for his wife." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Dorothea set down her teacup. "I would value your perspective, Mrs. Simmons." The older woman nodded. "A ranch wife's life is hard enough with a good partner. With one who views you as property, it can be unbearable." "Martha," Mrs. Parker exclaimed. "Really, such talk on the eve of the wedding." "Better the eve than the morning after," Mrs. Simmons replied firmly. "Miss Edwards comes from back east. She has no family here to protect her interests." Dorothea's heart pounded. "Are you suggesting Mr. Blackwell would mistreat me?" Mrs. Simmons chose her words carefully. "I'm suggesting that Augustus Blackwell is accustomed to absolute control over his domain. His last wife fled in the dead of night after 6 months of marriage. There were rumors about her condition when she left." Mrs. Jenkins stood abruptly. "This is most inappropriate, Mr. Blackwell would be furious if he heard such gossip in his own home." "And that, my dear," Mrs. Simmons said to Dorothea, "is precisely my point." The gathering dispersed soon after, the atmosphere strained by Mrs. Simmons's frankness. As the women were leaving, Mrs. Simmons pressed a folded note into Dorothea's hand. "Should you need assistance for any reason," she murmured, then was gone. Alone in her room, Dorothea unfolded the note. It contained a simple message. "Hawkins has a cabin by Miller's Creek. North Road, 3 miles past the Split Oak." Her hands trembled as she read it. Why would Mrs. Simmons give her Nick Hawkins's location? Did everyone see something she had been blind to? Doubt consumed her as she paced the room. Everything she had learned about Augustus Blackwell in the past 3 days contradicted the image she had formed from his letters. cold where she had expected warmth, controlling where she had hoped for partnership, viewing her as a possession rather than a person. When Augustus summoned her to dinner, she went down with leaden feet. He was in high spirits, talking expansively about the wedding, about plans for expanding the ranch, about the social standing they would enjoy as the premier couple in the county. "I've ordered a new carriage from back east," he told her, "for you to make your social calls. Can't have Mrs. Augustus Blackwell bumping around in an ordinary wagon." "That's very thoughtful," she said mechanically. "Of course, you'll need to be selective about your associations," he continued. "The Parkers are acceptable and the Wilsons, but the Simmons woman has a sharp tongue and questionable loyalty." Dorothea froze. Had he somehow learned of Mrs. Simmons's warning? "I found Mrs. Simmons to be quite direct but honest." Augustus's eyes narrowed. "Honesty without discretion is just rudeness. I prefer a wife who understands the value of discretion." The implied threat was clear. Augustus Blackwell expected not just obedience but complete alignment with his views and interests. Any deviation would be considered disloyalty. After dinner, he presented her with another gift, a gold bracelet studded with rubies. "For tomorrow," he said, clasping it around her wrist. "A symbol of our union." The bracelet felt like a shackle. "It's beautiful," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Only the best for what's mine," he replied, kissing her hand possessively. "One more night, Dorothea, and you'll be Mrs. Blackwell. I suggest you rest well. Tomorrow will be a long day and the night even longer." His suggestive tone made her skin crawl. Back in her room, Dorothea stared at her reflection in the mirror. The diamond necklace and ruby bracelet glittered against her skin, beautiful, expensive, cold. Symbols not of love but of ownership. Was this to be her life? Adorned in jewels but bound in invisible chains. Mrs. Simmons's note seemed to burn in her pocket. "Hawkins has a cabin by Miller's Creek. An escape route. But to what? A life of poverty with a man she barely knew. How could that be better than security with Augustus?" Yet when she tried to imagine her wedding night, Augustus's hands on her body, claiming what he saw as rightfully his, she felt physically ill. The decision crystallized slowly as the house grew quiet. She could not marry Augustus Blackwell. Whatever the consequences, whatever hardships lay ahead, she could not bind herself to a man who viewed her as a possession to be displayed and controlled. With shaking hands, she packed a small bag, just essentials, nothing that would be immediately missed. The diamonds and rubies she left on the dressing table along with a brief note. "I cannot go through with this. Forgive me." She waited until the house was silent, until even Mrs. Jenkins's light had gone out. Then, dressed in her simplest traveling clothes, she slipped down the back stairs and out through the kitchen. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead, a half-moon providing just enough light to see by. Dorothea made her way to the stables, grateful for the skills Nick had taught her, however briefly. She saddled Rosie as quietly as possible, murmuring reassurances to the mare. "Just you and me now, girl," she whispered, leading the horse out the back way to avoid the bunkhouse. "We need to be very quiet." Once clear of the immediate ranch buildings, she mounted and urged Rosie toward the north road. The mare seemed to sense the need for stealth and moved quietly through the night. Dorothea's heart pounded with fear and exhilaration. She had never done anything so reckless, so completely outside the bounds of proper behavior. Yet with each hoofbeat carrying her away from the Double B Ranch, she felt a growing sense of rightness. Whatever lay ahead, poverty, hardship, scandal, at least it would be a life of her own choosing. The North Road was easy to follow in the moonlight. After about an hour's ride, she came to the split oak. Mrs. Simmons had mentioned an ancient tree whose trunk had divided into two massive sections. Dorothea turned Rosie onto the smaller trail leading west and continued more slowly, searching for signs of a cabin. Another 3 miles, Mrs. Simmons had said. What if Nick wasn't there? What if he turned her away? She pushed the doubts aside. One step at a time. First, find the cabin. Then decide what to do next. The small trail curved around a hill, and suddenly there it was, a modest log cabin nestled against a stand of pines. A thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. A small corral stood to one side, and in it she could make out the shape of a horse, Midnight, the black stallion. Dorothea reined Rosie to a stop, sudden doubt paralyzing her. What was she doing, arriving unannounced at a man's home in the middle of the night? It was scandalous, improper, potentially ruinous. But the alternative, returning to marry Augustus Blackwell, was unthinkable. She dismounted and led Rosie to the hitching post near the cabin door. Before she could lose her courage, she knocked firmly. For a long moment, there was silence. Then footsteps, and the door swung open to reveal Nick Hawkins, shirtless and bleary-eyed, a revolver in his hand. "Miss Edwards," he exclaimed, lowering the gun immediately. "What in heaven's name?" "I couldn't go through with it," she blurted out. "The wedding, I couldn't marry him." Nick stared at her for a heartbeat, then stepped back, gesturing her inside. "Come in before you freeze." The cabin's interior was simple but tidy: one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a curtained-off section that presumably contained a bed. A fire burned low in the grate, casting a warm glow. "Sit," Nick said, indicating a chair while he pulled on a shirt. "I'll build up the fire." Dorothea sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how cold and tired she was. The enormity of what she had done began to sink in. She had fled in the night, abandoned her fiancé on the eve of their wedding, ridden alone through wilderness to the home of a man she barely knew. "What happened?" Nick asked, stoking the fire before sitting across from her. The simple question unleashed a torrent. Dorothea found herself telling him everything: Augustus's controlling behavior, the warnings from Mrs. Simmons, her growing realization that she would be nothing more than a possession in her marriage. "I couldn't do it," she concluded, tears finally spilling over. "I couldn't bind myself to him for life." Nick listened without interruption, his expression grave. When she finished, he rose and poured her a small measure of whiskey. "Drink this. It'll help with the chill." She took a sip, grimacing at the burn but welcoming the warmth that spread through her chest. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "Mrs. Simmons gave me your location, but I have no right to impose." "You're not imposing," Nick said firmly. "I'm glad you came here instead of trying to make it to town alone. Blackwell will have men searching by dawn." The reality of her situation hit her anew. "He'll be furious." "Yes, he will." Nick didn't sugarcoat it. "But he's also proud. Being jilted publicly will sting worse than losing you. My guess is he'll claim he discovered some flaw in your character and called it off himself." "That would be a mercy," Dorothea said. "But what am I to do now? I have no money, no connections here." Nick studied her thoughtfully. "Do you have family back east who might take you in?" "Distant cousins who made it clear they had no room for a penniless relation," she said bitterly. "That's why I answered Augustus's advertisement in the first place. And now you're free of him, but with no resources and a powerful enemy." Nick ran a hand through his hair. "Not an easy situation, Miss Edwards." "Please call me Dorothea," she said. "After fleeing to your home in the middle of the night, formality seems rather pointless." That drew a smile from him. "Dorothea, then, and I'm Nick." An awkward silence fell between them. The impropriety of their situation was inescapable: an unmarried woman alone with a man in his home in the middle of the night. In Boston, her reputation would be beyond salvage. Here in Wyoming, the consequences could be even more dire. You should take the bed, Nick said, breaking the silence. I'll sleep by the fire. Tomorrow we can figure out a plan. I can't put you out of your bed, she protested. You're not putting me out of anything. I've slept rougher places than my own floor. His tone brooked no argument. There's a basin and pitcher behind the curtain if you want to wash up. Grateful for his practical approach, Dorothea retreated behind the curtain. The small sleeping area contained a narrow bed, neatly made, and a chest of drawers with a basin and pitcher atop it. Simple, functional, masculine like Nick himself. She washed her face and hands, then sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Through the curtain, she could hear Nick moving about, settling himself by the fire. In the span of a few hours, she had upended her entire future, fleeing from a loveless marriage into complete uncertainty. Yet despite the precariousness of her situation, a sense of peace settled over her. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she felt she could breathe freely. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least she faced them on her own terms, not as Augustus Blackwell's ornamental wife. She lay down fully clothed atop the blankets, intending only to rest for a moment. Sleep claimed her instantly. Dorothea awoke to the aroma of coffee and the sound of quiet movement. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her. Then memory flooded back her midnight flight, the arrival at Nick's cabin, the uncertain future that awaited her. Sunlight streamed through the small window beside the bed, suggesting it was well into morning. She sat up, smoothing her rumpled clothes and hair as best she could before pushing aside the curtain. Nick stood at the small stove, frying bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He turned at her movement, offering a smile that somehow eased her embarrassment. "Good morning. Thought you might need the sleep." "What time is it?" she asked, noting he was already dressed for the day in clean denims and a fresh shirt. "Just past 9. He poured coffee into a tin mug and handed it to her. "Blackwell's wedding was set for 11, wasn't it?" "Yes." The realization that she should have been preparing for her wedding at this very moment struck her forcibly. "He'll know I'm gone by now." Nick nodded, sliding bacon onto 2 plates and adding some biscuits. "Probably has men searching already. We need to talk about what happens next." They sat at the small table, the domesticity of sharing breakfast at odds with the gravity of their situation. Dorothea found she was ravenous despite her anxiety and ate gratefully. "I've been thinking," Nick said after they had eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. "Blackwell's a proud man. Having his bride flee on the wedding day is a public humiliation he won't easily forgive." "I know," Dorothea said quietly. "I've made an enemy. A dangerous one," Nick agreed. "He'll want to find you if only to ensure you can't tell tales about him." Fear clutched at her heart. "Do you think he would harm me?" Nick considered his words carefully. "I think Augustus Blackwell believes he owns whatever he pays for, and he paid to bring you here as his bride." The implication was clear. In Augustus's mind, she had stolen something that belonged to him herself. "What can I do?" she asked, forcing down her rising panic. "I have no money for a ticket back east, even if I could reach a train without being caught." Nick toyed with his coffee mug, his expression thoughtful. "There are a few options, none perfect. You could try to reach Cheyenne and find work there. It's a bigger town, more anonymous. But Blackwell has business connections there. It wouldn't be safe for long." "What else?" "You could press on to California. More opportunities for a woman on her own and farther from Blackwell's influence. But it's a hard journey, expensive and dangerous." Dorothea's heart sank. Every option seemed to involve considerable risk and hardship. "And the third option," Nick met her eyes directly, "you could marry me." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. Dorothea stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon." "Marry me," Nick repeated, his voice steady though a flush had crept up his neck. "Today. As Mrs. Hawkins, you'd have a measure of protection Blackwell wouldn't dare violate openly. A husband has legal rights a jilted fiancé doesn't." "But we barely know each other," Dorothea stammered. "And you can't possibly want what I want," Nick interrupted, "is to help you. And this is the most practical way I can think of." "A marriage of convenience," she said, trying to process his suggestion, "if you want to call it that." Nick's eyes held hers. "Though I wouldn't be offering if I didn't admire you greatly, Dorothea. Your courage, your spirit riding out alone in the night rather than sell yourself to a man like Blackwell. That takes a special kind of bravery." His genuine admiration touched her deeply. "But your life you'd be binding yourself to a woman you barely know, taking on responsibility for my safety, my welfare." "I'm offering, not being forced," he pointed out. "And it needn't be permanent. Once Blackwell loses interest or moves on, if you wish to dissolve the marriage and make your own way, I wouldn't stand in your path." The practicality of his offer was undeniable. As a married woman, she would have legal protection, a home, a chance to build a new life away from Augustus Blackwell's reach. Yet the idea of entering another hasty marriage, even to someone as honorable as Nick seemed to be, gave her pause. "Would we be? That is, would you expect?" She couldn't bring herself to articulate the question. Nick's expression softened with understanding. "I would expect nothing from you that you weren't freely willing to give, Dorothea. We would live as husband and wife before others, but in private, whatever grew between us would be by mutual choice, not obligation." His sensitivity eased her greatest fear. "You're offering me safety with no strings attached." "I'm offering partnership," he corrected gently. "Two people facing the world together because it's easier that way. Whatever else develops between us would be up to time and circumstance." Dorothea rose, moving to the small window to look out at the Wyoming landscape. The morning sun gilded the distant mountains, and closer at hand, wildflowers dotted the meadow beside the cabin. It was beautiful, wild, free, everything her life with Augustus Blackwell would not have been. "How would we live?" she asked practically. "I know nothing about you, really." "Your work, your circumstances." Nick joined her at the window. "I'm a horse trainer, as you know. I travel between ranches, breaking and training horses for a fee. It's not steady work, but I'm good at it, and it pays well enough when I'm not gambling away my earnings." He smiled ruefully at that admission. "I own this cabin and 20 acres around it. Not much compared to Blackwell's empire, but it's mine, free and clear. No debts. And what would I be in this arrangement, besides your legal wife?" "Whatever you want to be," he said simply. "My partner, if you're willing. I could teach you more about horses. You have a gift for it. We could build something here together." The sincerity in his voice moved her. This was not a man offering charity or seeking to possess her, but a hand extended in genuine partnership. Still, doubts lingered. "It seems a terrible imposition on you," she said. "Taking on a wife you never sought, potentially making an enemy of Augustus Blackwell." "Blackwell's already my enemy," Nick said dryly. "Has been since he cheated me out of my best breeding mare last year in a rigged card game. As for the imposition," his voice softened, "having you here, even for one night, has made this cabin feel more like a home than it has in all the years I've owned it." His admission surprised her. She turned to face him fully. "Are you certain, Nick, truly certain you want to do this?" In answer, he took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I've spent my life moving from place to place, job to job, never settling, never committing. Maybe it's time I did. And I can think of no one I'd rather start with than you, Dorothea Edwards." The warmth in his blue eyes, the steadiness of his gaze, The honesty of his words all combined to quiet the doubts in her mind. This was not the secure future she had once envisioned, but it offered something Augustus Blackwell's wealth never could: freedom, respect, and the possibility of genuine affection. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I'll marry you, Nick Hawkins." Relief and something warmer flickered in his eyes. "Then we should go now, before Blackwell's men widen their search. The pastor in Willow Creek doesn't know you, and he owes me a favor. He won't ask questions." Events moved quickly after that. Dorothea washed and tidied herself as best she could with the limited resources available. Nick saddled Midnight and Rosie, and within half an hour they were riding west toward Willow Creek, a small settlement about 10 miles from Nick's cabin. As they rode, Nick told her more about himself: born in Missouri, raised on a small farm, left home at 16 to find his own way in the world. He had worked as a cowboy, a wrangler, eventually finding his calling with horses. He spoke openly of his faults: a tendency to gamble when bored, a restlessness that had prevented him from settling anywhere for long, a quick temper that had gotten him into scrapes. "But I'm trying to do better," he told her. "This past year, I've been saving more than spending, building something lasting at the cabin. Maybe I was waiting for a reason to truly settle down." His honesty was refreshing after Augustus's carefully curated self-presentation. Dorothea found herself sharing her own story, in return her comfortable upbringing in Boston, her father's financial ruin and subsequent death from heart failure, her mother's passing 6 months later, and her desperate decision to become a mail-order bride rather than rely on the reluctant charity of distant relatives. "I've never really had to fend for myself," she admitted. "I may not be much use to you as a partner." "You're stronger than you know," Nick said with surprising conviction. "The woman who rode alone through the night to escape a bad situation has more courage and resourcefulness than most men I know." His faith in her warmed something long cold inside Dorothea's heart. Willow Creek proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings around a crossroads: a general store, a small church, a blacksmith shop, and a few houses. Nick led her directly to the church, where the pastor, a kindly older man named Reverend Johnson, greeted them with surprise but no suspicion. "Nick Hawkins. Twice in 1 month must be a record," he joked before noting Dorothea's presence. "And who might this young lady be?" "Dorothea Edwards," Nick introduced her. "Soon to be Dorothea Hawkins, if you're willing to do the honors, Reverend." The pastor's eyebrows rose, but he asked no awkward questions, merely nodded and invited them inside. "Any particular reason for the haste?" "We've waited long enough," Nick said smoothly. "And I'm due at the Bennett Ranch next week. Thought we'd get married before I have to leave." It was a plausible explanation, and the Reverend accepted it. "Well then, let me fetch Mrs. Johnson to witness. Can't have a proper wedding without at least one witness." While he was gone, Dorothea whispered, "Is this truly legal, so quick with no license?" "Frontier marriages often happen this way," Nick assured her. "The Reverend will file the paperwork after the fact. It's how things are done out here, where courthouses can be 100 miles apart." Reverend Johnson returned with his wife, a plump, cheerful woman who immediately took Dorothea under her wing, exclaiming over her travel-worn appearance and insisting on at least brushing her hair and pinning a flower from the church garden to her bodice. "Every bride should have something pretty, even in a rush," she declared, fussing over Dorothea like a mother hen. The ceremony itself was brief, but surprisingly meaningful. Standing before the small altar, holding Nick's work-roughened hands, Dorothea found herself moved by the solemnity of the moment and the sincerity in Nick's voice as he repeated the traditional vows. "I, Nicholas James Hawkins, take thee, Dorothea Marie Edwards, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When her turn came, Dorothea spoke the words clearly, committing herself to this unexpected partnership with a man she had known for only 3 days. Yet somehow, it felt more honest than her planned wedding to Augustus would have been. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Johnson concluded with a smile. "You may kiss your bride, Nick." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in Nick's eyes, their first real kiss in front of witnesses, sealing a marriage neither had planned until hours ago. Dorothea gave him a small nod, and he leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in a gentle, brief kiss that nevertheless sent warmth spreading through her chest. After the ceremony, Mrs. Johnson insisted they stay for a simple wedding meal. "Can't send newlyweds off without at least breaking bread together," she declared, setting out cold chicken, bread, and pie with motherly determination. Over the meal, the Johnsons asked the usual questions: how they had met, their plans for the future, which Nick answered with casual ease, weaving truth and fiction into a plausible narrative that omitted any mention of Augustus Blackwell. Dorothea followed his lead, gradually relaxing into her role as the new Mrs. Hawkins. By mid-afternoon, they were on their way back to the cabin, officially husband and wife. The reality of what they had done began to sink in as they rode side by side across the open country. "Mrs. Hawkins," Nick said, testing the name with a smile, "has a nice ring to it." "It's all happened so quickly," Dorothea marveled. "This morning I woke up a runaway bride, and now I'm a wife." Having second thoughts, he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. "No," she said truthfully. "Surprising as it is, this feels right. More right than marrying Augustus ever did." Relief softened his features. "Good. Because I meant what I said in those vows, Dorothea. I'll do my best to be a good husband to you, however this marriage came about." "And I'll try to be a good wife," she promised. "Though I may need some guidance on what that means out here. My preparation for being Mrs. Blackwell involved a lot of instruction on hosting dinner parties and managing servants." Nick laughed. "Not much call for that at my cabin, I'm afraid. But we'll figure it out together." As they approached the cabin, Dorothea was struck by how different it looked to her now, not a temporary shelter in her flight from Augustus, but her home. Small, simple, but hers to share with the man who had offered her safety and respect when she needed it most. Nick helped her down from Rosie, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hawkins." The tenderness in his voice brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Thank you for everything." He led the horses to the corral while Dorothea went inside, seeing the cabin with new eyes. It was clean but sparse, clearly a bachelor's dwelling with minimal comforts. If she was to make a life here, there were changes she could make: curtains for the windows, perhaps a tablecloth, better organization of the kitchen area. When Nick came in, he found her assessing the space with a practical eye. "It's not much," he said apologetically, misreading her expression. "But I can make improvements. It's a good home," she assured him. "Just needs a woman's touch here and there." "Whatever you want to do, it's yours to change," he said, and she knew he meant it. Unlike Augustus, who had dictated every aspect of her future role, Nick was offering her true partnership. The rest of the day passed in domestic collaboration. Nick chopped firewood while Dorothea organized the kitchen and prepared a simple supper from his supplies. They worked together easily, finding a natural rhythm despite their brief acquaintance. As night fell, however, the awkwardness they had both been avoiding came to the fore. "There was only one bed. I'll sleep by the fire," Nick said immediately, sensing her discomfort. "You take the bed." But you're tired too, Dorothea protested, and it's your bed. Our bed, he corrected gently. But I meant what I said this morning. Nothing happens between us that you don't freely choose. For tonight, you take the bed and I'll take the floor. We have time to figure out the rest. His consideration touched her deeply. In Boston society, a husband's rights over his wife's body were considered absolute. Augustus would never have shown such restraint. Yet here was Nick, putting her comfort above his own desires or expectations. "Thank you," she said simply. They retired early, both exhausted from the emotional strain of the day. Dorothea lay in the narrow bed, listening to Nick settle himself on a bedroll near the fire. Her husband, a word that had terrified her yesterday, now brought a strange comfort. "Nick," she called softly through the curtain. "Yes, I'm glad it's you. That I married, I mean." There was a pause, then his voice came back, warm and sincere. "I'm glad too, Dorothea, more than I can say." She fell asleep with those words echoing in her heart, feeling truly safe for the first time since leaving Boston. The first light of dawn was filtering through the cabin window when Dorothea awoke to the sound of horses approaching. For a moment, she was disoriented, then memory flooded back her flight from Augustus, her hasty marriage to Nick, this small cabin that was now her home. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Nick was already up, pulling on his boots and reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside," he told her tersely. "Could be Blackwell's men." Fear clutched at her heart as Nick moved to the window, peering out cautiously. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's Harris from the Double B. Alone, it looks like." He set the rifle aside but kept it within reach as he opened the door. Dorothea pulled on her dress hastily behind the curtain, listening intently. "Morning, Hawkins," came a man's voice. "Mind if I step down?" "Depends on your business, Harris," Nick replied coolly. "Just delivering a message from Mr. Blackwell." Dorothea's heart pounded. She emerged from behind the curtain, fully dressed but with her hair still loose around her shoulders. Nick glanced back at her, his expression warning her to stay back. "What's the message?" Nick asked. Harris, a weathered cowboy Dorothea recognized from the Double B, dismounted slowly. "Mr. Blackwell knows the Edwards woman is here. Says to tell her she's made her choice and will live with the consequences." "That all?" Nick's voice was deceptively casual. "Not quite." Harris looked uncomfortable. "He says to tell you that your training services won't be required by any ranch in the county from now on. He's seen to that." Nick's jaw tightened, but he showed no other reaction. "Blackwell doesn't control every ranch in Wyoming." "No, but he controls enough." Harris shifted his weight. "There's more. Miss Edwards left behind some jewelry, valuable pieces. Mr. Blackwell says they were gifts conditional on the marriage. Since she broke the agreement, he considers them payment for his troubles." "They're welcome to him," Dorothea said, stepping forward despite Nick's warning look. "I never wanted his gifts." Harris nodded, acknowledging her presence for the first time. "Madam, Mr. Blackwell also said to inform you that he's written to your relatives in Boston, advising them of your situation. Said they should know what kind of woman you turned out to be." The deliberate cruelty of this last message hit Dorothea hard. Augustus knew her distant cousins had only reluctantly agreed to house her after her parents' deaths. By painting her as scandalous and immoral, he was ensuring she could never return east, even if she had the means. Nick moved to her side, placing a supportive hand at the small of her back. "You can tell Blackwell that Mrs. Hawkins has no interest in his opinions or his jewelry, and if he sends any more messages, they'd best be delivered more respectfully." Harris's eyebrows shot up. "Mrs. Hawkins, we were married yesterday," Nick confirmed. "So whatever tale Blackwell's spinning about a runaway bride, he can add that she's now a legally wedded wife." Harris absorbed this information with a low whistle. Well, that changes things. I'll let Mr. Blackwell know. You do that, Nick said coolly. And tell him if he has any further business with my wife, he can address it to me directly. After Harris departed, Dorothea sank into a chair, trembling slightly. He's trying to ensure I have nowhere to go, no way back to my old life. Nick knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. You don't need a way back, Dorothea. You have a way forward right here. But he's threatening your livelihood, she said, distressed. You said yourself he controls many of the ranches in the area. There are other ranches, other territories, Nick said calmly. I've never been one to stay in one place too long anyway. Except now I have a reason to come home, wherever my work takes me. His confidence steadied her. You're not angry that I've brought this trouble to your door. The only one I'm angry with is Blackwell for trying to intimidate us, Nick corrected himself. But his influence only stretches so far. We'll be all right. Dorothea nodded, drawing strength from his assurance. So what do we do now? Now, Nick said, rising and pulling her gently to her feet. We have breakfast. Then I need to ride to the Bennett Ranch and explain why I'll be late starting their horses. And you, Mrs. Hawkins, might want to think about what supplies you'll need to make this cabin more comfortable. We can go to Willow Creek tomorrow and stock up. His practical approach to their situation calmed her fears. This was not the end but a beginning, a life built on their own terms, despite Augustus Blackwell's attempts to punish her for her defiance. Over the next week, a pattern began to emerge in their unusual marriage. Nick rode to the Bennett Ranch each day to work with their horses, returning home each evening. Dorothea threw herself into transforming the cabin, cleaning thoroughly, rearranging furniture, and adding small touches from their trip to Willow Creek: curtains for the windows, proper dishes to replace Nick's mismatched collection, herbs planted in a small garden outside the door. At Nick's insistence, she had purchased fabric for new dresses more suitable for ranch life than her Boston clothes. Her first attempts at sewing them were clumsy. She had always had dressmakers for such tasks, but she improved with practice, taking pride in her growing self-sufficiency. Their evenings together were the best part of each day. Over simple meals that gradually improved as Dorothea's cooking skills developed, they talked for hours about their pasts, their hopes, their views on everything from politics to literature. Nick was surprisingly well-read for a man who had left formal education behind at 16, and Dorothea found in him a mind as engaging as his presence was compelling. They still maintained their separate sleeping arrangements, Nick on a bedroll by the fire, Dorothea in the bed, but the initial awkwardness between them had faded, replaced by a growing comfort in each other's company. One evening, about 10 days after their hasty wedding, Nick returned with news. Bennett offered me a longer contract, he told her over dinner. He's impressed with my work with their problem horses, wants me to stay on for at least 2 months, training all their young stock. That's wonderful, Dorothea said, genuinely pleased for him. He's not concerned about Augustus's influence, Nick grinned. Bennett and Blackwell have been at odds for years. I think he's hiring me partly just to spite Augustus. So you'll take it, if you're all right with it, Nick said, his expression growing more serious. It means I'll be gone all day, every day. The Bennett Ranch is a fair ride from here. His consideration, asking her opinion rather than simply informing her of his decision, touched Dorothea deeply. Of course I'm all right with it. It's good work, and we need the income. Nick studied her face. You've been alone a lot this past week. I don't like leaving you here with no company. I'm fine, she assured him. I have plenty to do, and I'm enjoying making the cabin more livable. You've worked wonders, he acknowledged, glancing around at the transformed space. But there's more to life than housework. I was thinking, how would you feel about coming with me to the Bennett Ranch occasionally? Mrs. Bennett mentioned she'd like to meet you, and they have some gentle horses you might practice your riding on." Dorothea brightened at the prospect. "I'd like that very much." And she hesitated, then pressed on. "I've been thinking. You mentioned once that I have a good way with horses. Maybe you could teach me more about training them. Not the breaking part, but the gentling afterward." Nick's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "You're interested in learning horse training?" "I am," she said, surprised by her own certainty. "When you were working with Rosie that day at the Double B, something just clicked for me. I felt a connection I've never experienced before." "You have a natural gift," Nick said, and she could tell he meant it. "I'd be proud to teach you." That night, lying in bed listening to Nick's steady breathing from his place by the fire, Dorothea reflected on how different her life was from what she had expected when she left Boston. Instead of being a wealthy rancher's ornamental wife, hosting dinner parties and managing servants, she was cooking her own meals, sewing her own clothes, and contemplating a future learning horse training, of all things. Yet she felt more alive, more herself than she ever had before. With Nick, she was discovering aspects of her character that had never had the chance to develop in her sheltered Boston upbringing: resilience, resourcefulness, a love of learning practical skills. And there was Nick himself, kind, honest, respectful, treating her as a true partner despite the unconventional start to their marriage. She found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, admiring the grace with which he moved, the quiet competence he brought to every task, the rare but transformative smile that lit his features when something pleased him. She was falling in love with her husband, Dorothea realized, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Not the manufactured affection she had tried to cultivate for Augustus based on practical considerations, but a genuine, growing attachment founded on respect and shared experience. Did he feel the same? He was unfailingly kind and considerate, but he maintained a certain reserve, never presuming upon their marital status, never pushing for more intimacy than she offered. Was it mere respect for her boundaries, or did he see their marriage as purely practical, a way to help her without any deeper attachment? The question troubled her as she drifted into sleep. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Nick worked at the Bennett Ranch 6 days a week, returning home each evening tired but satisfied. Twice a week, Dorothea accompanied him, gradually making friends with Anna Bennett, the rancher's wife, and gaining confidence in her riding skills under Nick's patient tutelage. True to his word, Nick began teaching her about horse training, starting with the basics of equine psychology and behavior. Dorothea proved an apt pupil, her natural empathy with the animals complementing the technical skills Nick imparted. "You're a natural," he told her one afternoon as she successfully coaxed a nervous mare through a series of obstacles. "You understand intuitively what takes most people years to learn." His praise warmed her more than seemed reasonable. Dorothea found herself working harder, eager for his approving smile, his words of encouragement. At home, their domestic arrangement continued as before, companionable evenings followed by separate sleeping arrangements. Yet Dorothea increasingly found herself wishing for more. The casual touches they shared, his hand at her waist helping her mount, their fingers brushing as they passed dishes at dinner, sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with growing desire. One evening in late July, a summer storm blew in unexpectedly. Nick had not yet returned from the Bennett Ranch, and Dorothea paced the cabin anxiously as lightning split the sky and rain lashed the windows. When he finally arrived, he was soaked to the skin and shivering. "Nick," she cried, helping him inside, "you're freezing." "Storm caught me halfway home," he managed through chattering teeth. "Midnight nearly bolted when lightning struck a tree not 20 yards away." Dorothea moved with swift efficiency, helping him out of his wet clothes and wrapping him in a blanket while she stoked the fire to blazing. She heated water for coffee, adding a splash of whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink this," she ordered, pressing the steaming mug into his hands. "Then a hot bath. I'll heat more water." He looked up at her with surprise and something warmer. "You've become quite the capable ranch wife, Dorothea Hawkins." "Someone has to take care of you," she replied, busying herself with heating bath water to hide the blush his words provoked. When the bath was ready, a metal tub in front of the fire, screened by a blanket hung from the ceiling for privacy, she left him to soak while she prepared a simple but hearty stew. By the time he emerged, dressed in dry clothes with his damp hair curling against his neck, color had returned to his face. "Better?" she asked, ladling stew into bowls. "Much." He joined her at the table, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when I first suggested this marriage, I thought I was doing you a favor. But these past weeks, I've realized I'm the one who benefited most." Dorothea looked up, surprised. "How do you figure that, coming home to a warm cabin instead of a cold, empty one? Meals shared instead of eaten alone, someone to talk to laugh with." His voice softened. "Someone who cares if I get caught in a storm." The naked emotion in his eyes made her heart race. "I do care, Nick, very much." Something shifted in the air between them, the comfortable companionship deepening into something more charged. Nick reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Dorothea, I need to say something, and I hope it doesn't make things awkward between us." He took a deep breath. "This marriage may have started as a practical arrangement, but my feelings for you have become anything but practical." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you," he said simply. "Not out of duty or circumstance, but because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Brave, kind, intelligent, beautiful inside and out." Joy surged through her, but caution made her hesitate. "Are you certain? We've only known each other a short time." "Some things you just know," Nick said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I knew it that first day in town, when you stepped down from the stagecoach looking like you'd wandered into a foreign country. I knew it when you stood up to Blackwell at the corral. I knew it every night watching you sleep behind that curtain, wanting to be closer but respecting the boundaries we set." Dorothea's eyes filled with tears. "I've been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "But I was afraid you saw our marriage as nothing more than a kindness to a woman in trouble." Nick stood, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. "Is this how you comfort all women in trouble?" he asked softly, before lowering his mouth to hers. Unlike their brief, ceremonial kiss at their wedding, this kiss was deep, tender, exploring. Dorothea melted into him, her arms twining around his neck as she responded with growing passion. Nick groaned softly, pulling her closer, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you, Dorothea Hawkins," Nick murmured against her lips. "Not because you're my wife on paper, but because you've become the other half of my heart." "And I love you," she whispered back. "Not because you rescued me, but because you truly saw me when no one else did." That night, for the first time, they shared the narrow bed behind the curtain, their marriage becoming complete in every sense. In Nick's tender, passionate lovemaking, Dorothea discovered yet another facet of the partnership. They were building a physical connection as deep and satisfying as their emotional one. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Dorothea marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had come west seeking security through marriage to a wealthy man, only to find true richness in the arms of a man whose material possessions were few, but whose capacity for love was boundless. "What are you thinking?" Nick asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm the wealthiest woman in Wyoming," she replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. I think you've mistaken me for someone else," he teased. "I believe it was Augustus Blackwell who owned half the county." "And who measures wealth only in acres and cattle," Dorothea said. "I prefer to measure it in happiness, in freedom, in love freely given and received." Nick tightened his arms around her. "By that measure, Mrs. Hawkins, we are indeed rich beyond counting." As summer gave way to fall, their life together blossomed. Nick's contract with the Bennett Ranch was extended, providing steady income that allowed them to make improvements to the cabin and its surroundings. Dorothea's skills with horses grew under Nick's tutelage, and she began to assist him with the gentling phase of training, showing a particular talent for working with nervous or mistrustful animals. Augustus Blackwell remained a shadow in the background of their happiness. True to his threat, he had blacklisted Nick with several of the larger ranches in the immediate area. But Bennett's endorsement opened doors with other ranchers who valued skill over politics, and by October, Nick had more work offers than he could accept. "Bennett wants me to take on his neighbor's horses next," he told Dorothea one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "And the Sherman place after that. Word's getting around about our work." "Our work?" Dorothea questioned, pleased but surprised. "Of course," Nick said, squeezing her hand. "Everyone who's seen you with the horses talks about your gift. Mrs. Bennett told her sister you have horse magic, whatever that means." Dorothea laughed. "Hardly magic, just patience and the excellent teaching of my husband." "It's more than that," Nick insisted. "You have an instinct I can't teach, and I've been thinking." He hesitated, suddenly nervous. "What is it?" she prompted. "I've been thinking we could expand our operation here, build a proper training corral, maybe a small stable. Take in horses for specialized training. With your touch for the troubled ones and my breaking skills, we could build something unique." Dorothea's heart swelled at the vision he painted: a true partnership, building a business together based on their complementary skills. "I'd love that, Nick." "Truly? It would mean less traveling for me," he continued, warming to his subject. "More time here working together, and eventually—" He took a breath. "Eventually, maybe we could think about expanding our family too." The tentative hope in his voice made Dorothea turn to face him fully. "You want children. With you, more than anything," he admitted. "But only if you do too, and only when you're ready." Dorothea had never thought much about motherhood before. It had been an abstract future concept, part of the duties she would eventually fulfill as a wife. But with Nick, the idea took on new meaning: creating a family together, raising children in this beautiful, wild place, teaching them to love the land and the horses as they did. "I think I'd like that very much," she said softly. "Not immediately, but soon. When we've built our business a little more." Nick pulled her into his lap, pressing his forehead to hers. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Dorothea Hawkins?" "You have," she smiled, "but I don't mind hearing it again." As winter approached, they implemented their plans. Nick built a proper training corral with a small stable, while Dorothea corresponded with potential clients, developing a business approach that emphasized their specialized skills with problematic horses. By Christmas, they had bookings stretching into spring. They celebrated the holiday quietly in their improved cabin, exchanging simple gifts: a new saddle blanket she had embroidered for him, a beautiful leather-bound journal he had ordered from Denver for her. But the greatest gift came unexpectedly, as Dorothea revealed the news she had suspected for several weeks. "I have something else for you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "Something that won't arrive until summer." Nick's eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Dorothea felt tears spring to her own. "A baby! We're having a baby," she nodded, laughing through her tears as he lifted her in a gentle embrace, spinning her around the cabin. "A little Hawkins," he marveled. "Our child. Are you happy?" She asked, though his radiant expression made the question almost unnecessary. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, setting her carefully on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I never thought I'd have this, a woman I adore, a home that's truly ours, a child on the way. You've made me the richest man in Wyoming, Dorothea Hawkins." As he bent to kiss her, Dorothea reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking a wealthy husband, convinced that financial security was the path to happiness. Instead, she had found a different kind of wealth with Nick, a richness measured in love, respect, partnership, and the family they were creating together. It was a lesson she would never forget, and one she would someday share with their child. True wealth was not found in possessions or status, but in the bonds forged with those who saw your true value and loved you for exactly who you were. And by that measure, Dorothea and Nick Hawkins were wealthy beyond compare. 5 years later, Dorothea stood at the fence of their largest training corral, watching with pride as Nick worked with a spirited black stallion remarkably similar to Midnight, now retired to stud and father to several promising colts. The Hawkins ranch had grown steadily, their reputation for rehabilitating problem horses spreading far beyond Wyoming territory. They now employed 2 young wranglers and had recently built a second cabin to house clients who came from as far as Denver to consult on difficult cases. "Mama, look at Papa." 4-year-old James tugged at her skirt, his blue eyes so like his father's wide with admiration as Nick guided the stallion through a complex series of maneuvers. "I see him, sweetheart," Dorothea said, lifting the boy for a better view. On her hip, 2-year-old Sarah babbled happily, pointing at the horses with chubby fingers. "I'm gonna train horses just like Papa when I grow up," James declared with the certainty of childhood. "I'm sure you will," Dorothea agreed, kissing his tousled hair. "You've already got a good start." It was true. Both children seemed to have inherited their parents' affinity for horses. Even Sarah, barely talking in complete sentences, could identify different horses by name and temperament. As Nick completed the training session, he caught sight of his family at the fence and broke into the warm smile that still made Dorothea's heart skip. He said something to the wrangler assisting him, then jogged over to them. "There's my favorite audience," he said, lifting James from Dorothea's arms and swinging him up onto his shoulders, then leaning in to kiss Sarah's cheek and finally, Dorothea's lips. "What did you think of Thunder's progress?" "He's coming along beautifully," Dorothea assessed professionally. "Another week, and he'll be ready for me to work with him on those anxiety issues." Their partnership had evolved into a seamless system. Nick handled the initial breaking and basic training. Then Dorothea took over for the psychological aspects, helping horses overcome fear, aggression, or distrust. Together, they had saved dozens of valuable animals from being destroyed due to behavioral problems. "Mr. Reynolds arrived while you were working," Dorothea informed him. "I've put him in the guest cabin. He brought that mare he wrote about, the one that attacks any man who comes near her." Nick whistled. "Sounds like your specialty, not mine." "That's what I told him," she agreed with a smile. "I'll start with her tomorrow." As they walked back to their expanded home, the original cabin now connected to a larger structure with proper bedrooms for the children and a spacious kitchen. Dorothea marveled, as she often did, at the life they had built together. Their success hadn't come without challenges. Augustus Blackwell had continued his campaign against them for the first 2 years, spreading rumors and trying to damage their reputation. But their results with horses spoke louder than gossip, and eventually, even ranchers who had once been firmly in Blackwell's camp began to bring them horses in secret. The final breaking point had come 3 years earlier, when Blackwell himself had purchased an expensive thoroughbred stallion that proved unmanageable. After 2 trainers failed and advised destroying the animal, Blackwell had swallowed his pride and sent a representative to engage the Hawkinses' services without revealing the horse's owner. Nick had recognized the Double B brand immediately, but had taken on the job anyway. The horse shouldn't suffer for his owner's pride, he had said simply. Their success with the stallion had effectively ended Blackwell's vendetta. He never acknowledged them directly, but the whispered blacklisting stopped, and occasionally, through intermediaries, more horses from the Double B arrived for training. "Penny for your thoughts," Nick said as they reached the house, setting James down to run ahead with his sister toddling after him. "Just thinking about how far we've come," Dorothea replied, leaning into his side as his arm circled her waist. "From a desperate runaway bride and a broke horse trainer to this." She gestured at their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the life they had created together. "Best decision I ever made offering to marry you," Nick said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I think I got the better end of that bargain by far." "I don't know about that," Dorothea countered with a smile. "I was the one who came looking for wealth and found something far more valuable instead." Nick stopped, turning to face her fully. 5 years of marriage had only deepened her love for this man, his face more weathered now, a few strands of silver appearing in his wheat-colored hair, but his blue eyes still held the same warmth and integrity that had drawn her from the beginning. "What did you find instead?" he asked softly. Dorothea reached up to touch his cheek, her heart full. "A love that makes me richer than any cattle baron's wife could ever be." Nick's smile was radiant as he bent to kiss her, there in the yard of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared dreams. "Then we're wealthy indeed, Mrs. Hawkins, wealthy indeed." And as their children's laughter rang out from the porch, as the horses nickered in the corrals that represented their livelihood, as the setting sun painted the sky in colors no amount of money could buy, Dorothea knew with absolute certainty that she had found the richest kind of love, one built on respect, partnership, and the freedom to become her truest self in the arms of a man who valued her for exactly who she was.